Welcome in, Slumpbusters. It is that time to fill out a bracket, sit back, and listen to some sound advice from the Slumpbuster podcast crew. Juju Talk Sports, Kyle Ledbetter here, and we are joined today by college basketball enthusiast Jonathan Smith of CBS Sports Indianapolis and host of Shooting the Schmidt podcast. Jonathan, welcome in. How many brackets have you already filled out today, man?
Man, I've made one. That's it. It's been a day. So usually I'd have 2 or 3 done by now, but I've got like my main one already set.
Hey, we got until Wednesday to get some of these brackets working out, kind of like figure out what teams we fall in love with. I know Kyle's already worked on a few, and he's going to be happy to tell some of the teams that he's really favoring. We know who our top 4 seeds are: Gonzaga, Arizona, Kansas, and Baylor. Obviously, it's a season of upsets. Teams like this, big name teams that have just been dominating the regular season, are on upset alert every step of the way. Jonathan, out of these 1 seeds, is there someone that you think is most vulnerable for a potential tournament upset? Maybe not in the first round, but just down the line.
For sure. So I would say Baylor, just simply because of the injury to LJ Cryer, one of their lead guards. He's got the foot injury. He was in a boot on Thursday in their loss to Oklahoma. So between that and just how loaded the eastern side of the bracket is, I mean, like, their road is by far the toughest. If they should beat Norfolk State. And look, if they beat them, Marquette, obviously they're coached by Shaka Smart. That's a fantastic coach. North Carolina has had games where they've played great, like, the final regular season game of the year when they destroyed Duke in Cameron Indoor. And then if they're able to get by one of them, they then have to play UCLA and then Kentucky or Purdue. So that whole side is loaded. So I would definitely say Baylor.
So on the flip side, we have the fun teams, the Cinderella darlings that last year ended up capturing attention because we had Oral Roberts, we had Abilene Christian last year. So are there teams that you really like who could pull off upsets? I know I like South Dakota State. I haven't watched them play, but I just like South Dakota State. You're doing actual analysis here. So who's someone that you really like on that side?
There's several. And, the best thing about March Madness is anybody can win it any given year. But, in years past, it still felt like it's been like a 2 or 3 horse race. Whereas this year, man, there's so many different teams who could win it. But in terms of these, mid-majors who can make deep runs, man, there's several. Vermont ran through their conference tournament. They won every game they played by 30 plus points. Which, like, I don't care who you're playing, you win by 30 plus multiple games in a row. That's extremely impressive. San Francisco and Murray State are also a couple of mid-majors who can make some deep runs. Chattanooga, I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if they upset Illinois in the first round as a 13 seed. But the mid-major I have circled is 10th seeded Davidson. Man, they're really good. Anytime we see a mid-major get an at-large bid, that they can play. And I feel like the blueprint for these mid-major teams is to have a bunch of good shooters and then one guy who's like a borderline NBA prospect. Well, Davidson has a bunch of guys who can shoot. They're shooting 38% from 3 as a team on the season. And they have 2 borderline NBA prospects. One guy who was the A10 player of the year, Luka Brajovic. He's 6'10", shooting 42% from 3. Guy can absolutely light it up. And then the guy I really love to watch, I'm going to butcher his name too, Hyun-Jung Lee, the guy's from Korea. He's having a fantastic season as well, averaging 16 points and 6 rebounds. He's 6'7". So Davidson, they're big, so they can match up with these bigger Power 5 teams. Man, they can stretch the floor and really light it up.
I'm really glad that you mentioned Davidson, because Davidson's coming off a tournament defeat to Richmond. So Richmond managed to slide in the tournament, but they're not the only team that managed to ride a wave of momentum to win their conference tournament. Obviously, we saw the Hokies, Virginia Tech. They won the ACC conference tournament. And then in the Big Ten, you had Iowa just go on a run. Out of these teams that got hot at the right time, is there anyone that you foresee making a big time run in the actual NCAA men's tournament?
Yeah, so I actually have a list of non-1 and 2 seeds that I think could make a run and win the whole thing. Iowa is on that list. Okay, Iowa can score with anybody. The offensive talent that they have is incredible. I've watched way too much Big Ten basketball this year as a guy who's from the South. And Iowa's a team who can score with anybody, but their defense as of late, the defense that they played in the Big Ten tournament, it is the best I've seen them defend all year long. And if they continue to defend like that, they are more than capable of getting hot and going on a run and winning the whole thing.
So you mentioned some of those teams that are hanging around there, and you mentioned it's a deep field this year. So the 2 seeds are really interesting to me. I think Villanova is really strong. Duke obviously has all the storylines there. Auburn was a team that was number 1 for most of the season. So of those 2 and 3 seeds, which ones do you like to maybe go on a little bit of a run here in the tournament?
Of the 2s and 3s, okay. I love Purdue. Being in Indianapolis, there's no bias there at all. West Lafayette's only about an hour from here. So yeah, I love Purdue. In terms of the 3 seeds, they are definitely my favorites. In terms of the 2 seeds, I'm down on Auburn. They've been struggling here as of late. They've got some selfish guards who think that they're the best players on their team, which if you watched Auburn play, even if you haven't, you've heard of Jabari Smith. He just doesn't get enough shots. So I don't really trust Auburn in that sense. Kentucky's really good. They defend at a high level. Obviously, they have Oscar Tshiebwe, who is my pick for National Player of the Year. I mean, he's been awesome. And man, it's just probably Kentucky. Kentucky's probably my favorite 2 seed. Yeah, I would say Kentucky. They're deep. They're loaded. It's John Calipari, and this is an older team of his. And so I don't think that they'll have the slip up in March as we are accustomed to seeing John Calipari coach teams have.
Now, not all of these quadrants are built the same. You mentioned some teams will have tougher roads than others. Which of these quadrants do you think is going to be the toughest to get out of? Is it going to be the South? Is it going to be the Midwest? Is it going to be the West? Is it going to be East? Which is the field that has the most minds in it?
I would say the East for sure. I mean, it is just top to bottom. Looking at not only the players in this, side of the bracket, but just the coaches that are here as well. Obviously, Baylor, defending national champions, are on that side. UNC, like I said, has shown spurts where they've played at an extremely high level. Marquette has beaten, good teams throughout this entire year. We saw St. Mary's beat Gonzaga a couple weeks ago. UCLA, Final Four team from last year, who's finally healthy. Like, if they're healthy through the whole year, UCLA is fighting for a 1 or 2 seed, right? We have Texas, who's coached by Chris Beard. They can easily go out and lock a team up and defend their way to a victory. We've already talked about Virginia Tech a little bit, how hot they've been. Purdue has the best guard in the country in Jaden Ivey. Murray State and San Francisco, I talked about them a little bit earlier. Both of those teams are really good. Then obviously, you have Kentucky. So I think the East is just absolutely loaded.
So I ask you right now, as we get ready for a wonderful 3-week dash to the final, who is your Final Four? Who do you, Jonathan Smith, think will make it to Louisiana this year?
In my Final Four, coming out of the West, I have the Arkansas Razorbacks. I absolutely love that team. They defend. They're arguably the best defensive team in the country. They have one of the best guards in the country in J.D. Notae, who's been named to a couple All-American teams. The only question that I have about them is their ability to shoot the ball. They can be really streaky, but they shoot the 4th most amount of free throws in the country. And because of that, I think that they also shoot, I believe, 77% as a team from the free throw line. So I think that makes up for their inability to shoot the 3. I like them coming out of that side. Eric Musselman also doesn't lose whenever he has more than 3 days to prepare, which sets them up very well for their probable matchup against Gonzaga. So I like Arkansas to come out of that side. Coming out of the South, I like Arizona. That team's deep. They're loaded. If you've seen Arizona play, you really don't have to say too much. Coming out of the Midwest, man, the Midwest was tough just because there's no one in this side of the bracket that I absolutely love. Kansas has been really up and down against ranked opponents this year. They're 5-4 against teams that have been ranked, but 2 of those wins were against Iowa State, who's, as we can see, an 11 seed down there. So I really kind of question their strength of schedule. We saw them get ran off the floor against a really good Kentucky team. So coming out of the Midwest, I have Auburn. I do think that, Bruce Pearl, he's taken them to the Final Four before with a lot less talent than what he has now. I do think that they'll get it figured out in terms of feeding Jabari. And then coming out of the East, I have Purdue.
One thing I really appreciate about March Madness being back is the fact that it has the ability to elevate guys that we weren't thinking about for the NBA draft lottery. I think back to like a Steph Curry coming out of Davidson, or what Carmel was able to do in the 2000s. Who's a guy that can really elevate their draft stock here in this tournament and maybe push themselves into a top 5, top 10 pick come NBA draft season?
Ooh, push themselves into a top 5, top 10 pick. Okay, man, I was ready to go back to Davidson the way you set it up. Man, This one's tough. Davis from Wisconsin. I think he's a guy right now who's kind of sitting at the edge of the lottery. He's definitely a guy who can make a push because Wisconsin, they go as he goes. He's a guy who could, carry them to, an Elite 8. That Wisconsin team, they defend and they always play well in March. So I believe his name's Johnny Davis. I'm blanking on his name. That sounds right. Definitely him from Wisconsin. Jaden Ivey, probably already a top 5 pick, but he could definitely solidify being the 4th pick behind, Ben Caro, Jabari Smith, and Chet Holmgren. So those are kind of the 2 guys that I'll be looking out for in terms of solidifying themselves as, top 5 potential, top 10 picks.
All right. So I went against a lot of your picks. I have Gonzaga. I have Villanova. Kansas there, and then I have Kentucky in my Final Four. I'm going chalk and picking for the second year in a row Gonzaga to win the championship. But I ask you, who's showing up at the end with the big ol' championship trophy and confetti and sponsored ladders cutting down nets?
So I am going to take the Purdue Boilermakers to cut down the nets and to win the whole thing. Like I said, they have the best guard in the country in Jaden Ivey. He can score whenever he wants. He is, if you haven't seen Purdue play, he's incredible. He is probably my favorite player in the country to watch. Tall, long, can finish at the rim, can shoot. They have a lot of size in Williams and Zach Edey. Zach Edey, 7'4" with touch. A lot of times you get those 7'4" guys who have no touch around the rim. They're just kind of their rebound. Not Zach Edey. He's had multiple 20-point games this year. Thick. He is single-handedly stopped Kofi Cockburn, if that lets you know what kind of defensive force he is. So they have guys who can protect the rim. They can shoot the ball. They are as complete a team as they come. The question is, how well are they going to defend? Because they've had some problems committing to the defensive side of the floor throughout the season. But look, it's March. Certainly they're going to commit to playing defense at this time of the year. So I'm going to take Purdue.
Well, Jonathan, I'm definitely disappointed that you didn't drop my alma mater, the New Mexico State Aggies, at any point during this recording. But I am happy to shoot the Schmidt with you anytime. Jonathan, thank you so much for coming on. Go ahead and give us some obligatory plugs so people can find your content.
Yeah, so you can find Shooting the Schmidt. That is kind of my main side project, so to speak. You can find that on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Really short episodes, so you got a short drive to work. It is the perfect podcast to pop on. In addition to that, me and my boss here in Indianapolis will be launching the Circle City Sports Show, a totally Indianapolis-focused podcast. Colts, Pacers, Butler, Purdue, Indiana, kind of focusing on the teams around here. So you'll be able to find that on Apple and Spotify as well when we get that going, which will hopefully be sooner rather than later. And if you're here in Indianapolis, you can hear me, do sports updates on CBS Sports 1430 a.m.
Again, thank you for joining us. Go follow this man. Go ahead and check out all his great content, especially around this season of college basketball. One of the best times to be a sports fan. From Juju Talk Sports, from Kyle Ledbetter, stay safe, happy, and healthy, Slumpbusters. And we'll see you on the next one.